Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jacqueline Dorsey of Lean Frontiers and I'll serve as your host today. I'm excited to bring to you a short webinar on lean sales and marketing facilitated by Robert Pryor. Robert has been a sales, marketing, and general management executive in the computer and information technology industry for over 30 years. I have a couple notes for you before we begin our webinar. Due to our limited time, we will not be doing a Q&A session. Also, the webinar will be recorded if you want to refer back to it later. So for now, let me turn things over to Robert.
Thank you, Jacqueline. And I want to say thanks also to Lean Frontiers for hosting this webinar and also over a 2-week period providing a bunch of other important topics on Lean through their webinar series. It's really good stuff. In the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk about Lean selling, what it is, and why you should know about it. So for those people who may be somewhat new to Lean and Lean concepts, I want to do a brief history of Lean. It actually started, the roots of Lean started over 100 years ago with a gentleman named Henry Ford. Now, when you think of Henry Ford, the things that come to mind are probably mass production, the moving assembly line, which is something he invented. But in actuality, the key to all of Henry Ford's innovations was this idea of standardization in manufacturing. You see, before Henry Ford, the way cars were made is they were made by craftsmen. It was the craftsman era. And these craftsmen would be experts at making seats or wheels and so forth. And then there was another set of very expert craftsmen who were key from the craftsman way to the Henry Ford way. The time was reduced by nearly 90%. Which means that if it used to take 10 days to make a car, now it took 1. It actually took many more than 10 days to make a car in those days. But that's what we're talking about, a 10-to-1 improvement in the time it took to make a car. Now the reductions in these costs, primarily the labor costs, but also materials and waste reduction, enabled Henry Ford to sell a car that was affordable to the masses, and the automobile industry, as we know it today, began. But for the purposes of our discussion today, Lean as we know it started after World War II, ironically, to address the limitations of Ford's model. What limitations were there? Well, they're basically in the area of variety and agility, variety of product and the agility to change things quickly. You have likely heard the phrase popular in Henry Ford's era that you could have a Model T in any color you wanted as long as it was black. So a company called Toyota rose from the ashes of World War II in Japan, founded by the Toyota family, spelled with a D at the end. And the refinements they made to the production process became known as TPS, the Toyota Production System, which was later dubbed Lean Manufacturing, and was a major contributor to Toyota achieving global leadership of automotive manufacturing in 2008. Several books were published in the 90s and early 2000s, notably a couple from Jim Womack and his MIT team that extensively researched the global automotive industry to show the impact that this new lean manufacturing had on the way things were built and made. But today I'd like to highlight one book that's on the chart there, and that's this book called Lean Thinking, published in 1996. The reason I want to highlight this book is, first of all, it's a seminal book. Another reason is that without this book and the blueprint that it provided and structure that Jim Womack provided in this book, I would not have been able to write the book, Lean Selling. What this book did is it took various implementations of Lean, which by 1996 had moved out of the automotive factory into many different types of production, including service delivery. And Jim Womack and Daniel Jones looked at what the core similarities were across all of those different Lean implementations in many different environments. And he came up with 5 principles. And these are called the 5 principles of Lean thinking. The first one is value. And Lean thinking says value can only be defined by the customer, not by the producer. The value stream, which is the way that you produce the value for the customer. Flow, which means to get your process to continuously move forward without interruption. Pull, which says that demand should be the driver of production, not forecasts or inventory. And perfection, which we know today as continuous improvement, the ability and the desire to continuously improve processes, to reduce waste, and improve the percentage of value that your process provides to the customer. Now, from this blueprint, Lean came out of the manufacturing area to delivery of all types of products and services, all the way from hospitals and healthcare provisioning to education, government, mundane office administrative processes, product development, both hardware and software, even accounting. And most recently, one of the innovative applications of Lean you may be aware of is an entrepreneurialism through a book called The Lean Entrepreneur, which is all the rage in Silicon Valley and the startup communities today. Now, wherever there is, or it should be, a process, this has proven that Lean can improve it. In fact, results similar to those achieved with the Toyota production system, which was 50 to 90% improvement in every key metric in the process based on the first initial implementation of a Lean transformation, apply to all these areas as well. But each of these new applications required a creative approach to implement the principles of Lean thinking in entirely new domains. Now, you may have noticed that sales is not listed on the chart. It turns out that the sales function is a late adopter to Lean thinking and Lean methods. And I don't have time in this webinar today to go into all the reasons, but I'll tell you that they're both historical and cultural. So what is this Lean thinking, Lean selling exactly? I think the best way to explain it is to start with our traditional selling process, which is kind of out of shape today. It's bloated, it's overweight, it's slow, it's wasteful. What can we do about it? Well, what if we could create a Lean thinking machine? And that Lean thinking machine would have as its software or its DNA the 5 principles of Lean thinking. And we could take our traditional sales process and we could put it into this machine. And out the other side would come a much more fit, Lean selling process, one that's streamlined, leaner, faster, and more efficient. Well, what would you have if you had this kind of Lean selling transformation? Does it matter if you have a Lean selling process? Well, there are 5 key benefits that people in sales and sales executives and business executives will be very interested in when it comes to addressing chronic sales issues and the way that Lean selling does that. They are in the area of flow, speed, efficiency, predictability, and productivity. We hear from many sales executives about the frustration with their clogged sales pipelines. Prospects just don't seem to move forward. But with a lean implementation in the form of lean selling, we can get those prospects moving again and start to yield more results and closes at the end of the sales pipeline or funnel. Secondly, another big frustration in sales is the length of the sales cycle. Many people believe that there's very little that can be done about it, but lean selling says the sales cycle, like any other process, can absolutely be shortened to the extent of 50 to 90%. And anyone who's in sales or a business knows that time equals money. If you cut the time of the sales process, you're going to yield more money. Lean selling brings greater efficiency to the selling process, so you can get from point A to point B without going through a lot of unnecessary intermediate steps. Part of this is the removal and elimination of wasteful activities in the sales process, so you can make that direct move from the start of the sales process to the end. And then one of the big challenges a lot of sales organizations have today is no decision prospects. Prospects who are either called status quo or no decision, who just can't seem to say yes or no. They just keep saying maybe. But with lean selling, the number of no decision prospects in the sales funnel and sales pipeline can be dramatically reduced by more than 50% and more. All of these add up to greater productivity for the individual salesperson and the sales organization, where you can close more business without increasing the number of prospects that you have in your pipeline. How about your company? What does your company get from an implementation of lean selling? Well, the first thing is that it's very good for a company if salespeople are more productive and sales organizations are more productive. That definitely helps the top line of a company and is very likely to impact the bottom line greatly. But add to that another factor which is very strategic for companies, and it's called the cost of customer acquisition, or CCA. This CCA is a very important metric for determining how profitable your sales activities can be. But with the combination that lean selling provides of higher individual and team productivity with lowering the cost of customer acquisition, we get a big impact on profit margins of revenue that's generated from sales. The next big change that lean selling brings that's strategic to the company and to sales executives is predictability. Because lean defines a process and it puts metrics in place that can be both reviewed, measured, and acted upon, you also get tremendous insight into your sales process and what the connection is between inputs and outputs of your sales process. This leads to another very strategic benefit for companies, which is the ability to scale their sales organization by understanding how certain investments in sales and marketing are going to translate not only into revenue, but into profits through putting this type of system together. So what makes all these benefits possible? This brings us to the three big ideas of lean selling. The first one is service. Who is the customer for your sales process? Have you asked yourself that? Do you think it's your company? because your company has revenue goals and gives you quota targets? Well, that might be the answer for you or your organization, but it's not a very lean answer. Lean says that the customer is always the beneficiary of the process that we have to create value. And so if the customer is the beneficiary of the selling service that you provide, you can say that, in fact, the buyer in this case, because they may not be technically a customer yet, but the buyer is the consumer of the sales service that you provide. Now, the reason that this is the first big idea of lean selling is that because without a service, without providing a service to a customer, there is no way to make it more lean. Unless you acknowledge and recognize that what you are doing is providing a service to a customer, to a buyer, there's no way that lean can help you. That's why the first big idea of lean selling is sales as a service. Shifting to seeing buying as the customer and seeing selling as a service, it's not just about a service to buy your product or service that your company provides. That's not what we're talking about, because that's what everyone assumes selling is all about. Rather, the buyer is also buying something else that we might not be aware of, or we may not spend a lot of time thinking about, and that's our buying service. We actually do provide a buying service, which of course includes or is based on the product or service our company sells, but it's more than that. It's its own selling service. It's kind of a product in itself. And once we make this mental shift to looking at sales as a service, we can begin to ask ourselves, well, what is it that buyers really want from our sales service? Remember, the sales service that we provide is not free. Buyers actually pay for it. They pay for it with their time and with their emotional engagement and commitment to being involved in the sales process. Proof of this? We all know that many buyers now are going to the internet long before they contact the salesperson. Why is that? Well, I think it's proof that buyers consider our traditional sales service too expensive, and they're trying to find lower cost ways, both from a time, a cost, and an emotional point of view to get what they want. The second big idea of lean selling has to do with value. Now, you may be aware that the way that lean and lean thinking defines value is based on what the customer values. It's not what the provider of the product or service thinks is value, it's what the customer actually values, the consumer of that product or service. And one of the acid tests of whether a customer actually values something that you do is whether they'd be willing to pay for it, either with time or money or some other way. And if they're not, then they probably don't value it, and so you shouldn't be doing it from a lean perspective. Now, what is it that the buyer values? Well, the buyer has both rational and emotional requirements. And we focused a lot on these rational requirements about the product or service they want to buy, or price, or implementation. But many times, salespeople, sales organizations, we don't focus on the other, more hidden aspect of what buyers are looking for, which is to satisfy their emotional needs. What kind of emotional needs do buyers have? Well, they don't want to risk their career. They don't want to have buyer's remorse. They don't want to have a painful, difficult, and long drawn-out process. They want the sales process to be as painful and quick and as risk-free as possible. Those are some of the emotional requirements that buyers have. And by realizing this, it actually opens up a tremendous new door for salespeople to make themselves relevant and to address these requirements of buyers that most salespeople never even consider. So ask yourself, how many of your sales activities actually support the requirements of buyers? Because everything else that doesn't is waste from the viewpoint of lean. Therefore, the second big idea of lean selling is to understand and maximize the value of the selling process for the buyer and eliminate everything else. Everything else is waste, wasted time for both the seller and the buyer, wasted activities that don't need to be done and don't lead to the objective of the selling process, and spending time with defective prospects. These are prospects who haven't been sufficiently qualified and are never going to buy anything from you or probably from anyone else. The third big idea of lean selling has to do with shared process. Now, the leading edge thinking today in sales is that there are two processes: a buying process that the buyer owns and a selling process that the seller owns. And the leading edge idea is to synchronize these two processes. But lean selling goes a step further. It says there really are not two separate processes called a buying process and a selling process. There's actually one process that in the book I call the buying-selling process. So the third big idea of lean selling is that there's one process, and it's called the buying-selling process, that both the buyer and the seller should collaborate on. And they should collaborate on it with a shared objective that's important to both of them. And that objective may surprise you, but it's the decision, getting to a decision to buy something from someone as quickly and painlessly as possible. The reason I say it may surprise you is that many salespeople think that buyers just can't make up their mind. They can't make a decision. But I would submit that buyers don't make decisions because they either are not qualified to begin with or because they don't have what they require to make a decision. And it's the seller's role to make sure they have everything that they require to make a decision as quickly as possible. And so this is something that is not out of the control or out of the hands of the salesperson or sales organization. There's a lot that can be done to increase the number of decisions that buyers make and the speed with which they make them. And I submit that focusing on having the buyer and working with the buyer in a collaborative fashion on making a decision is much more important than focusing on having the buyer make a decision to buy from you. Now, I know this will be difficult for some people, but statistically it's true. Because our current sales process, the traditional way we sell, without this focus, is leading to only a 30% decision rate of prospects who are in the pipeline. Now, that's not 30% of prospects who make a decision to buy from you. That'd actually be pretty good. That's 30% of people who at the end of a very lengthy sales process to decide to buy anything from anybody. What about the other 70% who don't decide to buy anything from anyone? Well, that's what we call waste. And lean selling is all about reducing that waste and that number. So I'd like to, besides the three lean selling big ideas, I'd like to leave you with a couple of thoughts today. If you're in sales or you're a sales executive, you're a business executive trying to help your sales organization, think about a culture and a mindset where your salespeople can focus on helping prospects to make decisions more quickly instead of focusing on making decisions to buy from you. Doing the single thing, taking the single shift in the mindset and culture will enable you to double sales production per salesperson without adding additional prospects. And with that, I'll turn it back to Jacqueline.
All right. Well, Robert, thank you for facilitating our session today.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jacqueline, I did forget one thing.
Oh, sure.
I apologize. I know we don't have time today for Q&A, but I wanted to give you all on the call a way that you can follow up and either engage with me further or with Lean Selling. And there's several ways that you can do that. One is on our website, leansellingbook.com, where we have a free online selling assessment. You can email me at robert@leansellingbook.com. You can set up time for a brief phone chat with me at our contact page at Lean Selling Book site, or you can join our LinkedIn group, Lean Selling, or follow us on Twitter at Lean Selling. Okay, Jacqueline, now I'm done. Thank you.
All right. Well, Robert, thank you again for facilitating our session today. Before we close, though, I do have a couple of things I wanted to bring to your attention. The first one is we are launching a new Lightwise webinar series in 2016, and we want everyone who's participating to be the first to know about it. So if you are to go visit www.lightwise.me, you can submit your name and you'll find out what's coming and be the first to know. Also, don't forget to register yourself and your team for our first ever Lean Leadership Week. Lean Leadership Week is made up of 3 events during the week of October 5th and are all taking place near Jacksonville, Florida. So to wrap things up for today, I want to remind you that the webinar is being recorded. So look for an email following our time together for a link to the recording. Feel free to share this throughout your organization. So again, thank you, Robert, and thanks to each of you for participating in today's session. Goodbye.